So with everything that's going on, I've come to the conclusion that I have not been getting enough sleep lately. So I am making an effort to be less woke.
So I thought I'd go through this video today as I'm in lockdown, and I'm going to do it the old-fashioned way of just adding freeze frames, i.e. pausing the video, and just commenting in between the pauses. Now I know it's a bit old hat, but if you don't like that sort of video, then click off, feel free. First, I thought I'd go through though, well, it says in the description of this video. So it says, Doctor Who, Star Wars, Marvel, Star Trek and so much more have fallen to the scourge of trying to be woke. And that's bad. Care to explain why? Perhaps? No? Okay, so first of all I will explain why, so don't put words into my mouth. But I've got to explain, in order to answer that question, what is wokeism? Now, what wokeism is when you take, well, what they've done, they've taken the economic policies of orthodox Marxism and they've blended it together with the social policies of fascism, or the social viewpoint of fascism, where they believe that Karl Marx is right, apart from the fact that class is not the only discriminatory factor within society. Both the wokists, or the social justice warriors, and the fascists believe this.
In any case, he did diverge from Marx in some ways that are familiar, but in one really fundamental way. First of all, like Lenin, he said that the revolution isn't going to come on its own. There will need to be a revolutionary elite, a group of people who will develop the social myth, who will tell the narrative, who will not only develop proletarian consciousness in the sense of making people aware of their conditions, but tell them a story to make a certain kind of sense of it and to get them interested in revolution. Secondly, he rejected Marx's materialism. He thought Sorel was right. The power of ideas, of myths, of stories, of narratives is very important. And so he rejected Marx's materialism and his economic determinism. He said, no, there is an independent power of ideas, of myths. Those are an important part of how a society functions and how people act, and so they have to be recognized in a part of a theory. They aren't just economics, and they aren't just material things. But here's the final one, which was really the more fundamental break. Here is where he diverged from not only Marx, but Lenin and Sorel and a variety of other people. He rejected the idea of class struggle. He said, look, if all the conditions that matter are economic, and if we're really just pawns of economic forces, then indeed, really there's nothing to understand about history except the way in which these economic forces interact. And so you can think about the whole history of the world as being a history of class struggle. But if you reject that economic determinism, if ideas have a separate importance, if it matters what kind of story you tell, what kind of myths people believe in, how they understand themselves, in other words, then this idea of class struggle doesn't really make any sense. That can't be the sole driving condition of history, even if it's one of the things that makes a difference. Yeah.
Now, quite clearly they believe it in a different way, where the woke and the social justice warriors have pandered this viewpoint to a zeitgeist of the modern day rather than a zeitgeist of the 1930s. So they don't think that the Jews have privilege, they believe that white people have privilege. And the reason why this is bad, well, first of all, this sort of political philosophy has done lots of damage in the past, to say the least. And second, from an entertainment point of view, this political philosophy is only held by a small minority of people. And, for example, one branch of social justice is feminism. And in this country, in Britain, where Doctor Who is made, and where it's pushed on to people through the BBC, there's 3 times as many anti-feminist women than what there is pro-feminist women.
So in 2016, the Fawcett Society, which is a feminist charity, did a survey that found that only 7% of the people in the UK describe themselves as feminists, and the rest don't necessarily disagree with the concept of equality for women, but they certainly don't view themselves as feminists. This was quite the shock to the Fawcett Society at the time, but I think that a new survey is going to be even more of a shock, as reported by BuzzFeed. And using a picture of yours truly. A new poll has found that 1/3 of young British people have anti-feminist views. It's interesting, isn't it? A third of young British people believe that feminism is marginalising and demonising men, according to new polling shared with BuzzFeed News. This was done by Hope Not Hate, which are a very radically left-wing organisation, and they believe that these anti-feminism beliefs are a slip road to other far-right ideas, which doesn't explain why 33% of the country aren't far-right, or at least whatever that's supposed to be, like Nazis or something. But anyway, that's just what Hope Not Hate think, and what Hope Not Hate think is broadly irrelevant. The survey conducted by YouGov earlier this year found that 33% of people between ages of 18 and 24 agreed with the statement that feminism was to blame for making some men feel marginalised and demonised in society. Across all age groups, 42% of men felt that feminism was marginalising and demonising some men, while only a quarter of women agreed. Only? More than 3 times more women are anti-feminist than feminist.
So, seeing as these programmes are pushing a political agenda and their main priority is to push this political agenda rather than entertaining the people, it's going to wind quite a lot of people up, and that's why it's bad to have wokeism in entertainment.
What a load of rubbish! Tenant dies for Wilf, an old man, and this Dr. Woke ran away? This totally goes against all canon. It's called Doctor Who! Can't even call it that anymore. This is BBC agenda at its peak. This will lose so many more fans.
Your logic is flawed because Chibs & Co. do not have to explain a damn thing we would like them to. We the fans have much more imagination and creativity in our collective little finger than Chibs & Co. have, plain and simple. Chibs & Co. are too busy pushing an agenda to imagine a believable explanation.
What is to be gained with the gender swap? The same argument you did here can be there. Plus, it is agenda, and not story-driven.
I've been a fan of the show for ages, seen every episode including the classics and the audio episodes. Even built myself a full-size TARDIS and K9. The show is now. I can't watch it anymore. It's so painful. The show used to be sci-fi, not a woke soap opera. Absolute garbage.
Doctor Who ain't good sci-fi story anymore. It's there to shoehorn the BBC's PC left-wing agenda. It's beyond woke now.
Bit of a pattern, I'm sure you noticed. It's bad because it's SGW Pander, or left-wing agenda, or woke. Now, all of these terms are euphemisms for racial, gender, or sexual diversity, as well as any core message that is currently classified as being even slightly politically left of center.
Liar! There is no way you believe that these are umbrella terms for anything which is slightly left of political centre. For example, Bill Maher, quite left of the centre, not woke. Sargon of Akkad, left of centre, not woke. Blue Labour over here in Britain, left of centre, but definitely not woke. You are just expanding the definition of the word woke to evade answering for any negative consequences that woke culture has produced. Not everyone on the left is claiming that men, white people, or straight people, or whatsoever, have privilege, and no one is labelling these people as woke. I would also disagree with the racial, gender, or sexual diversity, as if this was to happen naturally, then no one would label it as woke. But if it has been forced and people have been picked based on the colour of their skin rather than their ability, then that's the starting point when people will label it as woke. As long as this positive discrimination is to tackle a belief in a heteronormative, patriarchal, white supremacist society. And like I said before, not everyone on the left believes in that.
So pretty much anytime anything acknowledges the existence of somebody who isn't white, heterosexual, cisgender, able-bodied, or is a woman filling a traditionally male function, tends to get mockingly stamped by detractors as woke. And look, the labeling is...
What absolute utter nonsense this guy is talking on about. Like, take for example, Dave Chappelle's stand-up routine, Sticks and Stones. Now, that definitely acknowledged black people because first of all, he's black, and second of all, during that routine, he talks about black issues. And that definitely wasn't labelled as woke. And the warriors of woke absolutely hated it. Another example, the film Joker. That didn't get labelled as woke, even though his next door neighbour was a person of colour.
What it is, there are people who, for reasons that escape me personally, find these things inherently offensive, and there isn't much that I or anybody can do about that fact. You can't make people change what bothers them like that.
Well, there is something which you can do about it, and that's to stop attacking this hidden agenda which just does not exist, by expanding the definition of woke in order to try and make out that people have got a problem with the colour of someone's skin or someone's sexuality or someone's gender or whatever, and actually start to attack what they're actually saying. And that's how they're sick of this political parasitoid which has infected the TV programmes, the comics, the films which they have been watching for years, which used to be based on liberal principles, and zombified them until the point that they're now an authoritarian piece of propaganda.
And I'm not gonna try. No, so what it is that I'm fed up with is how woke or progressive or agenda-driven or politically correct or whatever, of course the by now vintage chestnut of SGW pandering, I hate that those terms get thrown out as thought-terminating cliches. Those are phrases that get said in order to shut down the conversation and rely entirely on the idea that these things are inherently bad and that anything that can be associated with them is also bad, and therefore, once the label is applied, no more discussion is required.
So it is inherently bad, and the reason for that is because throughout the late 20th century and the 21st century, we've been having an experiment. And that experiment is what political systems work. Now, the one that came out on top was liberalism. And when I say liberalism, I mean by the English definition of the term and not the French definition of the term. So it's more concerned with negative liberty rather than positive liberty. So when you get a small minority of people, which mainly come from affluent parts of society, the chattering classes, and they've used their power and their social connections within the chattering classes to take over TV programs, comics and films, whatever, and then they start to push a positive liberty agenda onto the public, then this is inherently wrong. And it's inherently wrong because it's just immoral to take over something and turn it into something which it's not, and then trying to force it onto the people. Now, if it was done by people power, if the people just wanted it and it was done through the free market, then that would be okay. But we know it's not.
It's an anti-intellectual argument because it actively discourages the conversation, and it's also a coward's tactic.
Says the person who expands definitions in order to play this straw man of basically it's every time there's a person of colour, even though it's not, or every time there's someone who's not a cis, even though it's not, or every time there's someone of a different sexuality, even though it's not. All throughout this video, you have been anti-intellectual, and the reason for that is because you are a sophist.
The point of any thought-terminating cliche is to have the appearance of winning an argument without actually making any kind of substantive case for your perspective. It has the appearance of winning because those who disagree tend to take hearing these terms as signals that the discussion has hit a wall and there is little point in progressing. So they, I would think, wisely disengage, and then the anti-PC brigade declares victory by default because, well, if the other side left, it must be because you won, right?
The reason why they've won is because you're just making up your own argument and attacking that one by expanding the definition of woke in order to play this straw man. And it's not the only sophistic tactic which you're using, because you're trying to make out that people are just labelling it as woke as some ad hominem attack, which they're not. They're actually making arguments, and this can be seen in some of the comments which you presented before. For example, the first comment which you presented, "What a load of rubbish. Tenant dies for wealth. An old man. This Dr. Woke ran away. This totally goes against all canon. It's called Doctor Who. Can't even call it that anymore. This is BBC agenda at its peak. This will lose so many more fans." So they're actually making an argument here. They're not just labelling it as woke like you're trying to point out, by pointing out the fact that it totally goes against our canon, which it does, because the character has changed. The personality of the Doctor has changed. The essence of what makes the Doctor has changed. Like he's pointed out how Tennant dies for wealth, while this Dr. Woke has ran away. Before the Jodie bot, no other Doctor would let someone sacrifice themselves for the Doctor. That just would not have happened. And they're also making an argument that they've taken away some of the mystery of the programme by saying we can't even call it Doctor Who anymore. Because we can't, because they've given Doctor Who an origin story, and it's the question which should never be answered. So this is one of the pillars which propped up the programme, because it's quite a fascinating part to put into a character mystery. This is why people like the Joker so much, because we don't quite know his origins. You know, how he says it, it's a multiple choice question. This is why Buffy the Vampire Slayer was in love with Angel, because we didn't quite know his history, because he wouldn't talk about it, because he was ashamed of it. So we had that element of mystery. But now that has been taken away, and that is one of the arguments which this person is making. But you rather would like to draw a circle around the word woke and just state that they're just labelling something as woke, so you don't have to take these arguments on board.
The question that must never be answered, hidden in plain sight, the question you've been running from all your life. Doctor Who. Doctor Who. Doctor Who.